Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into the world of counseling. All those essential skills and techniques that make it work. So whether you're thinking of switching careers or just want to brush up on your knowledge, or hey, even if you're just curious about what really goes down in those therapy sessions, we've got you covered.
It's really fascinating stuff.
What we got to work with today, I hear it's some pretty interesting material from a 2022 peer counselors training.
Oh yeah, we're going to unpack the core stages of a counseling session, starting from that very first getting to know you phase, all the way to the really deep stuff. And then we'll see how a good counselor helps a client actually take action. You might even be surprised to see how many of these techniques you could use outside of therapy too.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's start with the basics.
Oh.
What is professional counseling exactly? I feel like we toss that term around, but our source material has this pretty interesting take on it.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. It defines professional counseling as a relationship that empowers people, you know, individuals, families, even groups to achieve their mental health and wellness goals, even education and career goals.
So it's not just about fixing problems, it's about reaching your full potential in
Right.
all these different areas of life. That's pretty broad.
It is. And the source material goes on to say that counselors help clients develop strategies to overcome obstacles and challenges.
Okay.
So it's really about giving people the tools and the guidance they need to deal with all of life's ups and downs.
I like that. It's like having a guide, to help you map out your journey and get through those difficult paths. So let's jump into the first stage of a counseling session, which the source material calls initial disclosure. Sounds pretty self-explanatory, but what's actually going on in this stage?
Well, think about walking into a therapist's office for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
It can be nerve-wracking.
Absolutely.
This stage is all about the counselor, building that rapport with the client. They're creating a safe space where the client feels comfortable enough to open up.
That makes sense, but how does a counselor actually do that? I mean, it's one thing to say be welcoming, but what are the actual steps to make someone feel safe enough to share their deepest thoughts and feelings?
Well, this is where those attending skills are so important. Counselors are trained to be really, really observant, picking up on all sorts of cues, both verbal and nonverbal.
Oh, wow.
It's like they're tuning into a whole different frequency of communication.
So it's more than just listening to what someone's saying.
Way more. Our source material points out that a whopping 93% of communication is actually nonverbal.
93%.
Oh.
Wait, that's a lot more than I would guessed. I suddenly feel like I'm missing a lot of what people are trying to tell me.
It's true, but don't worry. Counselors get special training to understand all those nonverbal signals. And one area they focus on is called kinesics, which is all about body language.
So like reading someone's posture, facial expressions, hand gestures, all those subtle movements we make.
Exactly. Like imagine a client who's constantly fidgeting or avoiding eye contact. To a trained counselor, that could be a sign of nervousness, discomfort, maybe even reluctance to share certain things.
It's like we're all speaking this secret language without even realizing it. What else are counselors paying attention to?
Well, there's paralinguistics, which is all about how something is said, not just what is said. So things like tone of voice, their pace, even those little pauses and hesitations.
So like a shaky voice could mean fear or sadness, and someone who talks really fast could be anxious.
Exactly. And then there's proxemics, which is about physical space and distance.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed how it's easier to share personal stuff when you're sitting next to someone rather than across a big table?
That's so true. I never thought about it like that.
Well, that's proxemics in action. Skilled counselors use this knowledge to create an environment where you just naturally feel safer opening up. It could be as simple as choosing a chair that's closer to the client or making sure the room feels warm and inviting.
So they're not just passively listening, they're actively creating a space that encourages trust and openness. It's like they're setting the stage for a meaningful conversation.
Exactly. These attending skills are all about building that initial connection, like laying the foundation for a house.
Uh-huh.
If the foundation's not strong, the whole structure is going to be shaky.
That's a great analogy. So the counselor is paying attention to all these subtle cues, body language, tone of voice, even the physical space. But what then? What do they actually do with all this information?
Well, that's where active listening comes in. And trust me, it's a lot more than just sitting there with your ears open.
I was going to say, what exactly makes listening active?
It's about really engaging with what the client is saying, both the content and the emotion behind it. Imagine you're trying to tell someone something really important to you, and they're just glued to their phone, half listening. How would that make you feel?
Honestly, I'd feel pretty dismissed, like what I was saying didn't really matter.
Exactly. And that's the opposite of active listening. Active listening is about putting away distractions, paying attention to the client's tone, and really listening for those emotional cues that might not be said directly.
So it's almost like you're trying to understand what's going on beneath the surface, reading between the lines.
Exactly. And this is where empathy comes in, which is one of the core conditions for building that strong therapeutic relationship.
Empathy, that makes sense. But isn't that just basic human decency? Why is it so important specifically in counseling?
It's not just about being nice. It's about truly understanding the client's feelings from their perspective, not just relating it to how you might feel in the same situation.
Ah, I see the difference. So it's
Yeah.
not about saying, oh, I totally get it. I went through the same thing. It's about acknowledging their unique experience and validating their feelings without putting your own stuff on them.
You nailed it. It's about putting yourself in their shoes, even if you haven't walked the exact same path.
Okay.
And this ties into another core condition, genuineness. Imagine a counselor who seems distant or robotic. You wouldn't feel comfortable opening up to them, Ress.
Definitely not. I'd feel like I was talking to a wall.
Exactly. That's why genuineness is so important.
Okay.
It's about the counselor being real, someone you can connect with. It's that authenticity that creates that safe space for real vulnerability.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not about pretending to be perfect or having all the answers. It's about being real. Okay, what's the third core condition we need to cover?
The third one is unconditional positive regard. And this can be huge for people who haven't experienced it before.
Okay, I'm all ears. What does unconditional positive regard look like in practice?
It's about accepting the client without judgment, no matter what they share. It means creating a space where they can be themselves without fear of being shamed or criticized.
Wow, that sounds incredibly powerful. I mean, so many of us are used to being judged or criticized, even by the people who are supposed to love us. To have someone offer that level of acceptance, it's got to be incredibly healing.
Absolutely. It lets the client let go of those defenses and truly explore their thoughts and feelings without fear of rejection.
This is making me think of all the times I've held back from sharing something because I was afraid of how someone would react.
Exactly. And that's the kind of barrier that unconditional positive regard breaks down. It fosters this trust and allows the client to feel truly seen and heard.
So the counselor is creating this incredibly supportive and non-judgmental space through active listening, empathy, genuineness, and unconditional positive regard. That's a lot. I'm sensing a theme here of the counselor being really active and intentional in their approach.
You're right. And this also brings us to another essential skill, concreteness.
Concreteness. Okay, that one sounds a bit more technical. What does that mean in counseling?
Think of it as helping the client get specific and focused. It's about moving away from vague generalizations and encouraging them to pinpoint their experiences, thoughts, and feelings.
So instead of saying, I'm always stressed, the counselor might encourage them to talk about specific situations or things that cause that stress.
Exactly. Concreteness helps the client gain clarity and move past those sweeping statements that can sometimes hide the real issues.
So it's like zooming in on the details, getting a sharper picture of what's really going on.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
And of course, none of this works without confidentiality. The client needs to know that what they share stays private.
That's a given, right? Wouldn't that be like a basic ethical rule for any counselor?
Absolutely. Confidentiality is key.
Okay.
It creates that foundation of trust that allows the client to be honest and vulnerable. It's like a sacred agreement.
Makes sense. Without that assurance of privacy, who would feel safe opening up about those really difficult struggles?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, confidentiality is essential, but it's important to mention that there are legal limits.
Yeah.
Like if a client says something that puts themselves or others in danger, the counselor is obligated to report it.
Right, of course. There are some situations where you have to break confidentiality for safety. Okay, so we've covered a lot in this first stage. It's clear that creating that initial foundation of trust and rapport is complex. It's amazing how much is happening beneath the surface.
It really is.
Yeah.
And all of this is just the setup for that deeper exploration that happens in stage 2. Ready to dive in?
Lead the way. I'm hooked. Okay, so we've built that foundation. We've established that trust, created a safe space. That's stage 1 right now. Now, I'm really curious, what happens when we get a little deeper in stage 2, which our source material calls in-depth exploration?
Yeah.
It sounds kind of intimidating, if I'm being honest.
It definitely can be.
Yeah.
This is where we really get into it,
Yeah.
and start digging into the root of the issues. It's where those aha moments happen,
Yeah.
the breakthroughs.
Uh-huh.
But it can also bring up some really tough emotions.
Yeah, I bet. I'm thinking about those times when I finally admitted something difficult to myself, and this wave of feelings just comes crashing in.
Right.
It's not always comfortable, but I guess that's part of the process.
It is. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Yeah.
Sometimes you find the good stuff and sometimes it makes you cry.
Mm.
But the counselor is there to help you through it, offering support and understanding the whole way.
So how does a counselor actually handle this? It can be tricky, right? It's one thing to create a safe space, but how do they help the client dig deeper without making them feel overwhelmed or judged?
Well, a good counselor will start by sharing their impressions of the client's issues.
Mm.
Always keeping in mind those professional boundaries, of course.
Okay.
It's like offering a little nudge in the right direction, helping the client see things from a different point of view.
So it's not about the counselor giving a diagnosis or, telling the client what's wrong with them.
Not at all. It's about offering insights, based on what they've observed and their expertise while still letting the client come to their own conclusions.
Okay.
It's a team effort, not a one-way street.
Right. It's got to feel like they're both working together, to discover those hidden truths.
So the counselor is sharing their impressions, but what other techniques do they use to help the client go deeper?
Oh, there are tons. For example, paraphrasing is a super powerful one. This is where the counselor takes what the client said and reflects it back in a clear and simple way.
So it's not just repeating what the client said word for word. It's more about summarizing the main point they've made, showing you really get it.
You got it.
Okay.
This can be really helpful if the client feels overwhelmed or if they're sharing a lot of complicated information. It helps them sort out their thoughts and feelings and understand their own experience.
It's like the counselor is holding up a mirror to the client's inner world and helping them see things more clearly. What other tools are there? Well, there's restatement, which is a bit more direct. This is where the counselor repeats the client's words almost exactly as they said them.
I can see how that might feel a little weird at first. Wouldn't the client think, yeah, I just said that. Why are you repeating me?
It might sound a bit odd, but it can be surprisingly powerful. Sometimes just hearing your own words repeated back to you can make you feel heard and validated.
Okay.
It shows that the counselor is really listening and taking those words seriously.
Gotcha. It's not just about the words, it's about the feeling of being heard and understood. What about reflection? I feel like that's another technique I've heard, but I'm not really sure what it is.
Yeah, reflection goes a little deeper. This is where the counselor clarifies and repeats the client's message, but really focuses on understanding the feelings behind it. It's about reading between the lines, and helping the client connect with their emotions.
So it's like the counselor is saying, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I also sense these other feelings that you might not be expressing directly.
Exactly. It's about helping the client tap into those little nuances of their experience, the feelings that might be hidden beneath the surface.
That sounds really valuable, especially for issues that are hard to put into words.
Definitely. Sometimes we're not even aware of what we're feeling until someone helps us see it. And that's what reflection does so well.
I'm starting to get a feel for how all these techniques create a deeper understanding. Any others we should talk about?
Oh, yeah. There are a couple more. Clarification is another important skill. It's where the counselor uses certain phrases to make sure they're on the same page as the client and encourage them to explore further. For example, they might say, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated, or can you explain what you mean when you say stuck?
So it's about making sure the counselor's interpretation matches the client's actual experience.
Exactly. It helps avoid misunderstandings and creates a feeling of understanding between them. And then, of course, there's summarization.
Okay, summarization. I think I can kind of guess what that means, but can you explain it?
It's basically pulling together everything that's been said and giving a concise overview. It's especially helpful when a client's been sharing a lot of information or when they're feeling lost in all the details of their story.
So it's like the counselor saying, oh, okay, here's what I'm hearing. We talked about this, this, and this. Does that sum it up?
Exactly. It helps to make things clearer and keeps everyone on the same page. It can also be really useful in spotting patterns or themes that aren't obvious at first.
It's not just about repeating the facts. It's about helping the client see the bigger picture, those connections and patterns that might be driving their behavior.
Right. And all of these skills, paraphrasing, restatement, reflection, clarification, summarization, they all work together to create a deeper understanding of the client's world. But there's another set of tools that's crucial in this process, and that's questioning techniques.
Oh, right. They seem pretty basic, but I imagine there's a real art to asking the right questions in counseling.
You're so right. Questions are the key to unlocking those deeper insights. But there are definitely good questions and not so good questions.
Interesting. What makes a good question in this setting?
Well, our source material makes a distinction between open-ended questions and closed-ended questions.
Yeah.
Think of it this way. Closed-ended questions are like multiple choice, and open-ended questions are like essay questions.
That's a perfect analogy. So a closed-ended question would be, are you feeling anxious? And an open-ended question would be, tell me about what's been making you anxious lately.
Perfect examples. Closed-ended questions can be useful for gathering specific information, or narrowing things down, but open-ended questions are the real gems for exploring deeper thoughts and feelings.
They give the client the space to elaborate, to really get into those nuances.
Exactly. They let the client tell their story in their own words without feeling limited,
Uh-huh.
and that's where the magic happens.
Okay, so we've got open-ended questions and closed-ended questions, and I'm guessing a skilled counselor uses both depending on what they're trying to achieve.
Right. It's like having a toolbox full of different wrenches.
Yeah.
You wouldn't use the same wrench for every job you know. It's about picking the right tool for the job.
Okay. So are there any like super specialized tools in this counseling toolbox?
It's funny you should ask because our source material actually does talk about some advanced empathy techniques that counselors use to take things to the next level.
Ooh, this is getting interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more about these advanced techniques.
So one is just called advanced empathy, and this goes beyond just acknowledging and validating the client's feelings.
Okay.
It helps them see the bigger picture, connect the dots, identify those patterns and themes in their lives that they might not even realize are there.
So it's like helping them understand themselves better, like those beliefs and things that might be driving their behavior.
Exactly. It's like the counselor saying, hey, I'm noticing this pattern in your life. Have you ever thought about it like this?
That's so powerful. It's like they're gently leading them towards those big aha moments that can lead to real change. What are some other advanced techniques?
Well, there's this technique called confrontation.
Hmm.
And I know that word can sound a little harsh, but in therapy, it's not about being aggressive or attacking the client.
Okay, good. I was about to say confrontation. Doesn't that seem kind of counterproductive when you're trying to build trust and safety?
I get it, but think of it more like a nudge or a reality check delivered with compassion.
Hmm.
It's about pointing out when what the client is saying doesn't match what they're doing or helping them recognize those self-sabotaging behaviors that might be holding them back.
So it's like revealing those blind spots, those patterns that the client might not even be aware of.
Exactly. And how it's done is crucial. A skilled counselor will do this with empathy and understanding, never in a way that feels judgmental or blaming.
It should be about guiding them towards self-awareness, not shaming them or making them feel bad.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Another technique is immediacy, which means bringing attention to what's happening right now in the relationship between the counselor and the client.
Okay.
It's about addressing any issues or tension that might be present at that moment, which helps build a stronger connection and more trust.
So it's like the counselor saying, hey, I'm noticing that you seem a little distant today. Is there something going on between us that might be affecting our work?
That's a great example.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of self-awareness and sensitivity for a counselor to pull this off well.
It does. It's about making it okay to talk about those difficult dynamics in a healthy way. Okay, what's the last advanced technique we need to cover?
The last one is interpretation. And this is where the counselor helps the client understand the deeper meaning behind their actions.
Okay.
This is a delicate technique, and it takes a lot of trust and the right timing.
Yeah, I can imagine if it's not done well, it could feel like the counselor's pushing their own ideas on the client.
You're absolutely right. It's not about the counselor giving their personal opinions or interpretations. It's about using their knowledge and experience to help the client see things in a new light, to uncover those hidden meanings and motivations that might be behind their actions.
We've gone through a lot in this stage. It's amazing how many skills and techniques counselors use to guide people through this exploration process. It's feeling less intimidating now and more like this incredible journey of self-discovery.
It really is, and it all leads to the last stage, commitment to action. Are you ready to see how it all comes together?
Absolutely, let's go. All right, so we've made that connection, gone deep into those underlying issues. Now what? What happens in this final stage, commitment to action? It feels like this is where we really get down to business, where all that talking turns into real change.
Exactly. This is all about giving the client the power to move from understanding to actually doing something about it. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, we've explored what's going on. Now let's figure out what you actually want to do about it.
So it's not so much about the counselor giving solutions, it's more about helping them find their own path forward.
Right. It's a collaboration.
Okay.
The counselor is like a guide or a resource, helping the client set goals, figure out what might get in the way, and create a plan that works for them.
So the client's in the driver's seat and the counselor's like the co-pilot helping them navigate. But I'm guessing the counselor still has some tools to help them stay on track.
Oh, for sure. Our source material talks about a bunch of techniques they use in this stage. One is called information giving and removing obstacles to change. Sounds technical, but it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, break it down for me.
Basically, it's the counselor giving the client information, resources, and support.
Yeah.
For example, if someone's dealing with anxiety, the counselor might teach them some relaxation techniques or connect them with a support group.
So it's not like the counselor is saying this is what you should do. They're giving the client the knowledge and tools they need to make their own choices.
Exactly. It's also about thinking ahead to what obstacles might pop up
Yeah.
and helping the client plan how to deal with them. Like a coach preparing an athlete for a game.
Mm.
They're not playing the game for them. They're helping them train and develop the skills to win.
Love the analogy. Okay, what other techniques are used in this stage?
Well, sometimes the counselor might give directives. These are like instructions or suggestions for the client. But they should always be presented as options, not orders.
Right. It can't feel like the counselor's telling them what to do.
Definitely. And that leads us to advising, which is another technique in this stage. This is where the counselor offers guidance and recommendations, but makes it clear the final decision is up to the client.
So it's about empowering the client to take ownership of their choices, even if they don't always agree with the counselor's advice.
You got it. It's about respecting their independence. And finally, our source material mentions role-playing, which is especially useful in group therapy.
Role-playing. Okay, now I have to hear more about this. I'm picturing people pretending to be trees or something. And what does role-playing actually look like in therapy?
It's not quite that dramatic.
Okay, good.
It's more like a safe way to practice new behaviors and communication skills.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's say a client is having trouble setting boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
They might role-play a conversation with a friend or family member, and the counselor acts as the other person.
Ah, okay, so it's like a rehearsal for real life, a chance to try different things and see what works.
Exactly. It helps clients push their boundaries and experiment without worrying about real-world consequences.
That's pretty cool. It makes it low pressure and creates this safe environment for growth.
Right.
So we've gone through all three stages: initial disclosure, in-depth exploration, and commitment to action. It's like a journey, isn't it?
It is a journey of self-discovery and empowerment.
Well said.
And even though we've been talking about counseling specifically, I think a lot of these skills can be used in everyday life.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like those attending skills we talked about, paying attention to body language and tone of voice, all those little things we often miss.
Right.
Just imagine how much better we could communicate if we all tuned into those things.
For sure. And active listening. That's a game changer in any relationship, whether it's with a partner or a friend or a coworker.
Makes you wonder what other things we might be missing in our daily interactions.
It really does.
How can we become better communicators, more empathetic listeners, and more supportive people in general? Something to think about.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a perfect note to end on. Give our listeners something to chew on until our next deep dive. Thanks for joining us.